Hey folks, welcome back to Gaming Garbage. We take a look at games, chat about the gaming news in the industry, and of course stream for fun. Today we're doing a state of gaming, and we're kind of talking about how the gaming crash could be upon us, how it could happen again. Now, to go over some history, gaming was getting pretty expensive, and some companies, they're feeling the pinch today. I mean, that's why we're seeing the layoffs, that's why we're seeing studio closures, reductions, and even just some selling of some studios and other IPs as well. Or like Ubisoft just creating another kind of like subsidiary and getting around some loopholes and getting more money from Tencent over there. $1.2 billion just from them. But first, we got to talk about the last crash, because that hasn't happened for roughly the last 40 years. And it's been quite a long time. Now, this is just kind of a brief history. It's not going to be super in depth. But the idea was that, Atari we had as a home console. But they really didn't want people to, third parties, to actually make video games or software. So they tried stopping them. Well, they couldn't really have a monopoly. That was an antitrust lawsuit for them, and or could have been. And ultimately, they couldn't stop third-party publishers from making games for it. And so they kind of had to open up the store, if you will. And so there was no real quality check. There were way too many games that were made, and players couldn't buy them all, ultimately. And also, too, got frustrated with the quality, because what we would call shovelware today was what was happening back then. Again, you couldn't borrow these, you couldn't rent these. There was really no way to tell how these games were except for someone having to buy them. And so they would kind of rent if they could, which really wasn't a thing back then, but they would generally buy them, or they would ask other people that had played these games how they were and how they compared. Kind of like what we do today with YouTube and news articles. But ultimately, there were too many, and a lot of the games really weren't that great. Now, there was no real way, of course, to see how these were made, but we also had some other things, too, during this time. We also had kind of the birth of the personal computer. Now, while they were extremely expensive, they were actually, quote, better than the Atari, and at least the stats and stuff. And there were actually more games made for them. And like, you could push the boundaries of gaming on the personal computer a lot like you can today. But yeah, they were all, very, very spendy. I mean, they were thousands of dollars back then. So an inflation today would just be completely insane. Also, during this time period, inflation was actually pretty high. We had an inflationary period in the 70s. And we also had rationing of certain resources like fuel and gasoline. We also had some more inflation and like a micro crash, if you will, in the economy in the 80s, like 80, 81, which didn't last very long. Then we had a couple of years that were actually pretty good. And then again, we had another crash, I think, late 82 through 83. And inflation was actually pretty high back then. And so were interest rates, because again, they were fighting the inflation. So inflation was pretty high, cost of debt was high. We kind of had this shock back and forth of just small recessions and crazy inflation, and it was actually a really turbulent time for like the last decade. It wasn't necessarily a fun time. There was also, too, a lot of layoffs, and the biggest amount of recession that we had would have been about 15 months in just after the little micro recession in 1980-81. And so, yeah, again, this just kept happening. It was really hard to get things stable. The economy was kind of all over the place. It was tougher to hold down a job, and yeah, there were riots and all sorts of stuff. So at the end of 1984, the rest of the world in 1985, we basically had this game crash happening. It wasn't just like a flash crash. There were some of these other factors, but like definitely by 84, the gaming industry was pretty dead, because we had the start of some of this stuff in like the late 70s and early 80s, and then you had the two little teeny recessions in there and a lot of other stuff, and gaming was basically seen as just a dead thing. People weren't interested as much. People were more focused on their personal computers, at least those that could afford it, and two, people were just trying to survive at this point. And so, yeah, by the end of 84 and 1985, for the rest of the world, we had the NES. This is when Nintendo actually came onto the scene, even though they'd been around for as a company for quite a while. This is when they were kind of putting out their first major console for $150. Today's money, that'd be about $440. It's a good chunk of money. The state of the economy, though, was starting to pick up after this point, and like economic output was starting to pick up, and the economy looked better, and people were kind of starting to get jobs again, kind of around this time. So Nintendo controlled the quality, though, is that since there was some other competition out there, they worked on controlling the quality of their games, working with partnerships and stuff. But again, they ultimately controlled the game because that was a major factor for the Atari back then. And ultimately, too, they took their time to create their famous IPs that we know today, like Donkey Kong, Mario, and Zelda. And I even remember playing some of these games. Probably my favorite was Super Mario Bros. World 3. That was a fun game. Super Mario Bros. 3, I think it was called. And then, too, there was, I can't remember exactly, but yeah, there was another Legend of Zelda game. And those were just fun to play. Again, those were kind of innovative, and they were different experiences, and they told a story really well, and there was just a lot of content, too, to the game. Another focus that Nintendo had for the NES was also affordability for the console. This was actually a major focus, not just for individual gamers, like the PC was more for individuals, of course. Excuse me, but Nintendo, worked on having a multiplayer system of Player 1 and Player 2 and was really built for kind of the middle-class family. While it wasn't meant to be top of the line for everything, the idea was to create fun games for the family experience, for siblings to be able to play together and or parents at an affordable price tag. So it was still something you had to save up for. It was still something you had to, kind of manage and deal with, and you couldn't just run out and buy it because, it was too expensive. But yeah, you did have to actually save up for this. But it was affordable if you did take that time. Even my parents, not even major gamers, they even bought one for all of us kids. So Nintendo was seen as a company that basically brought back gaming and really saved gaming because, again, none of the companies were as interested anymore. The interest in just the shovelware and all of the issues and way too many games, it just gotten so diluted that it was just kind of a mess. Now, if we take a look at today, we have a lot of these kind of same issues today. So we have diluted quality through microtransactions and through the store. We also have, the creation of NFTs and Web3 and blockchain. And while some of these can, of course, be useful, they've been used to monetize video games and content for quite a while, and which has been frustrating because we know that they're gimmicks. We know that they're ultimately ways to get us to give more money than the actual price of the game. And this actually became really popular right after Fortnite. So we had PUBG. Well, let's see. We had Siege, PUBG, Fortnite, Apex, and then the rest of them exploded basically after that. And it was those 4 games that all found success that were able to make quite a bit of money, sell a lot of copies, and had a lot of revenue coming in that, well, a lot of other people wanted to jump in on this too. We also had Take-Two change the price tag from $60 to $70 for NBA 2K22, I believe it was. This would have been back in 2021. We also had inflation that we hadn't seen in quite some time. Normally inflation was somewhere between like 2 or 3%. And we saw inflation of over 9% in a pretty short amount of time with all of the COVID stimulus money that we had. And this wasn't just in the United States or in a certain region. This was global. Literally money was going everywhere because, the world had been shut down. It was also very disruptive to work. And we had to kind of like this give and take of inflation and jobs and resources and supplies. And while some of the supplies weren't necessarily purposefully withheld, the supply chain issues for 18 to 24 months really messed up a lot of companies, really messed up what was available, and it really took a lot of the amount of stuff on the market. So here we had a lack of supply of goods and a boatload of extra artificial growth in money, and so people spent it on the goods that were left, and that's what drove the inflation. We also have right now a ton of games. Just last year in 2024, Steam alone had over 19,000 games that were added just to Steam. There's also the Epic Store. There's also GOG. There's also other game manufacturers out there. And then we have all of the console companies like Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox. And they all have studios and they're all making games. And we also have all the third-party publishers. So yeah, there's literally tens of thousands of games every year when you include everybody that have just been dumping stuff into the market as much as they can. We also see more AAA games. We even have seen now some quote quadruple A games, and I even believe GTA 6, in my opinion, will be a quadruple A game. Because yeah, they've spent so much money on it, they've been working on it for so long. But yeah, it's really kind of a crazy time. And now we're at a point where we have a ton of these games, we have a ton of availability, but a lot of them feel the same, and now that stimulus money is gone. So we're at a point where there's less money in the system, there's less money coming in, and that's why we're seeing these layoffs, that's why we're seeing those studio closures. Even on launch for some of these games, these studios are being shut down, which is kind of crazy. We're also seeing funding being pulled from publishers from different independent projects. And this has really hurt several studios, and their games never may actually come out. And some of them have actually, too, also been canceled. So even Sony alone has had 12 different live service games, and in just the last couple of years, they've canceled 12 of them, which is still incredible. We still have some other ones in the pipeline, like Marathon, for example. We're supposed to get more later this week, but we'll actually see how these goes down for everybody. Because again, the money's got to come from somewhere. And if the money's not there, then these games aren't going to succeed. We also, too, have great examples of companies that are struggling and having trouble and dealing with the layoffs and have less revenue. And so this would be EA. To a degree, also Activision Blizzard for some games. This also, too, would be Ubisoft, I think, as a great example. This, too, would also be Embracer Group. While they don't necessarily build games directly, they are a massive umbrella, literally the largest in the world for publishing, and they have the most studios under their own umbrella and also IPs under their own umbrella. So, but they've been having layoffs, they've been closing studios, they've been shrinking the sizes of different stuff. They've even been selling IPs and with some of their studios, like Gearbox and Saber Interactive. So they still just had layoffs recently, actually, with Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal. And so this is brutal. Like, there's a lot of people being affected in the gaming industry. And again, it just shows that enough money is still not coming in, even in 2025. In a lot of these companies, they are trying to survive. And two, we have a lot of devs that are also just trying to find work. Content, content artists and designers and directors, like everybody is kind of having a tougher time actually finding jobs. We also have poor quality right now in performance and also in bugs. We can take a look at Star Wars Outlaws. We can also take a look at Cyberpunk 2077, which they did spend $128 million to fix that, tens of millions more to actually give refunds. And then they still spent, I think, another $20 million it was to actually make the one DLC. Now, while they did have multiple DLCs planned, they canceled the rest of them. And we do know that they're working on like another Cyberpunk, and they're working on some other things too, but they stuck it out long enough with over $600 million in total to actually make Cyberpunk a success. Because yeah, that was really buggy. It was not ready. It was extremely bad on PC. We had the stutter issues and the bugs and the game progression issues and just animations and just, yeah, some of the quests were broken and missions. It was awful. I actually waited to play that game. And yeah, when it was getting its bad rap, I actually bought a copy for like, I think it was $25. Bought a physical version and just waited basically. And because yeah, I did try it a little bit, but yeah, it was pretty bad. But yeah, they did fix it, so that's a wonderful redemption story. Also, Diablo 4, like the first few hours or the first few days, like all of the servers were messed up, so people paid for early access that didn't actually get that time. And there were no refunds, of course, which is great. Good job, Blizzard. Also, Multiverse. And there's tons of other games that have actually failed. We've had so many games that haven't done well, that have been buggy, that haven't met expectations, that have been also delayed a ton and still been garbage. And yeah, just look at the last 5 years. There are so many examples, and also those studios that were connected with those games also closing or having layoffs or even being sold to somebody else. So yeah, poor quality is definitely present. We also have poor quality in story and characters. We can take a look at Veilguard, Suicide Squad, Assassin's Creed Mirage. I would even say too Assassin's Creed Shadows, though for Shadows you wouldn't really play Shadows for the story. You'd play it for the experience and the combat, right? The world, right? But there's a lot of other games out there too that have been disappointments. And just it feels like right now that people don't really know how to engage the audience for their characters to make them care about their characters and to have a gripping story that you just can't wait to go back. Of course, there are some that are luckily putting out some good games, but a lot of these are double A. And right now, the AAA, the big dogs, they're the ones actually having trouble making a lot of money. Not to say that indies and other smaller studios aren't, but we've had more studio successes. We have smaller studios having an easier time being sustainable, while these big ones are spending, $2, $3, even $500 million and still not making a profit. And it's pretty insane. And you can go on the store and actually start looking at the pricing for those games. And generally speaking, within a couple of months, if the game is bad, the game starts going on sale. And that's what we saw with a lot of these AAA games. We also got to see, too, that Nintendo is also raising prices. Just when $70 wasn't enough, we're now looking at $80, even additional money for physical. We're seeing a console that has, DLSS and some more 12 gigs of RAM and also VRR and some other nice features, including 4K and HDR10 and 120 hertz on the screen. But again, you're going to pay $450. So, yeah, that's a little expensive. Then we're looking at controllers that are basically $100, even more expensive than Sony's controllers, which is wild. We had $90 for, a pair of Joy-Cons that don't have Hall effects in them and are still going to have stick drift issues regardless, whether there were Hall effects or not. So yeah, we know that the content is ultimately going to cost more. We know too that the upgrades for the Switch 2 are also going to cost money. Some of them will actually be free, some of them will be $10, and some of them will be all the way up to probably like, $20, $30 if there's actually a lot of stuff and added content there for those games. But yeah, just, doing the math for my family and I, the Switch 2 is going to cost $800 for 2 pairs of Joy-Cons, the console itself, a subscription, and 3 games. $800 is pretty expensive for us, and we already have a few consoles at home, so we'll stick with those. But definitely, they are no longer focused, in my opinion, on, the affordable console, on focusing on the family. And, yeah, we'll see how that goes for them. And now, too, there's the addition of tariffs. And this doesn't just affect Nintendo. This also affects every other company out there that actually makes physical products. Whether it's the console, the controller, do-it-yourself repair, physical discs, hard drives, external hard drives, cooling fans, anything really. And like all of that stuff is already going to go insane. We also already saw crazy pricing, generally speaking, for the 50 series GPU cards, and also for AMD was a little better, of course. But even those are going to go up in price ultimately because nothing is actually made locally anymore. Generally, it's made somewhere else. So yeah, these tariffs are going to go wild. And man, I hope countries can figure it out. I really do. Also, too, we have debt, just like we did back then in the 80s. And there was a bunch of it. Interest rates are high. Mortgages have basically gone up from 4 to 7, 8%. Credit cards have gone from 20 to 30% or even higher. I even just saw that GameStop is releasing another credit card after they canceled their last one. Basically going at 36% per year, which, again, 36% is the highest I've ever seen. But just generally speaking, the debt is going up. And two, some people, they're just surviving on debt. They haven't been able to get their head above water, or they've barely been able to keep it above water. But then the inflation continues to go up and people lose their jobs and just people continue to fall on hard times. And so, yeah, there is some economic stress there too. And then the debt is really expensive on top of it. So if you already don't have the money and you have to spend some, you got to borrow it from somebody else. at a crazy interest rate, and then it's even harder to actually buy into your hobbies like gaming because you're just worried about food and shelter at the end of the day. So there's a lot of this stuff that's actually going on right now, just like in the late 70s and 80s. And while, gaming is not necessarily, I would say, in a crash, I certainly say we're hitting the signposts in the road that are leading us that way. And even today, like, we're definitely in recession for most of the world, if not all of it at this point, according to a lot of the government data. Unemployment, GDP, loans taken, delinquencies, food banks that are being used. All of this is basically making it ripe for another crash. And this wouldn't just necessarily be gaming. This would be like an all-out kind of crash for everything. You should take a look at the markets right now and how they feel about tariffs. There isn't a single one that's actually a happy camper at this point. And I really wonder ultimately what's going to tip us over. Because a lot of the bullet points that happened in the 70s and 80s, well, they're all happening again. And at some point, eventually, the dam can't hold back the water, right? As we continue to coast for longer and pile on more of these issues with expensive games and consoles and tariffs and debt and people having a hard time finding jobs or just affording life right now. Poor quality in games are making it frustrating with bugs and microtransactions is just the never-ending pursuit of live service to continue to get your money. It's really having a hard time making people actually want to pay for some of this stuff, let alone even being able to afford it. And so when people ultimately quit buying, well, that's why we have these studio closures, these layoffs, and everything else. That's what since we've been seeing since toward the end of 2022. So what do you guys think? Personally, I think we're on our way. I don't think we're quite there yet, but definitely when we see one of the big companies, like Atari, for example, basically take a nosedive and people start to lose kind of interest or there's some massive collapse somewhere, I think that's when we're going to be in a gaming crash. And generally, people would think, well, if one of the big ones falls, the others can just fill their place, right? Well, no. It's because all of the partnerships are interlinked between all of these companies. They all have deals, they all have games, they all have networks they're a part of, and other partnerships that are going on, and other games that are in development, and other people that are working. And if we have a big crash or a big loss, like potentially Ubisoft or some other names, then, well, the problem just continues to get worse. And the space continues to be less invested in. These companies start to take less and less risk, which means more boring games or cheaper games and less games that are innovative and kind of all feel the same, heavier microtransactions like we've been seeing, more expensive products and services like we've already been seeing with PlayStation and Xbox and now Nintendo. Like, at some point, folks, it has to stop. So where's that point going to be? Or are we actually going to tip over? Well, folks, thanks for tuning in. You can always follow me at GamingGarbage22 over at YouTube. You can also follow me over at Twitch if you'd like at Don't Tread on Thee. And be sure to click around on the playlist. We do a lot of different stuff. We do deep dives like this for some conversation or just to be informative. We also have some news once a week. We have some playthroughs of different stuff. And then there's also initial looks and reviews when I can do them, and including movie adaptations. I just worked on recording my Minecraft review for the movie. And go ahead and take a look. Thanks for looking, and I will see you guys on the next one.